Yeah,
Okay. Thank you so much, Harsha, for the wonderful introduction. And before I begin the session, let me first thank the CSI Hyderabad chapter for giving me this opportunity, especially Mr. Chandra Dasaka and Sunil, for always being very encouraging of my, ask of presenting something to the CSI group. And thank you so much for that. And before I begin the session, as Harsha mentioned, the topic is Agile Architecture in VUCA world. I wanted to share the reason why I picked up this topic. Agility being the central requirement for many organizations nowadays, and organizations are also looking for building a digital future for themselves. So IT architecture is something very key to the success of any digital transformation. And architecture is not only about technology these days, not only just about infrastructure, software, and all that, but architecture is mainly about managing complexity, reducing risk, and delivering the right solution. So I just wanted to discuss how best architects can work in an optimal fashion in an agile environment, and some of the principles that they can follow, some of the best practices that they can use, so that they can accelerate their digital transformation. So before I get into the session, I just wanted to share the agenda first. I will discuss with, what does Agile mean, the basics of Agile. Then I'll move on to discuss Agile architecture, then just enough architecture and different ways of working in Agile architecture, and what could be the characteristics of an architect in an Agile world. And followed by that, we can have a short Q&A. If you have any thoughts, feedbacks, any questions, we can discuss. So what does agile mean? We keep hearing about this word a lot, and most of our IT engagements are actually executed in agile methodology. So we can associate the words like iterative, incremental, flexible, interactive, and all these terms to the word agile, right? And we are also living in a VUCA world. As Bala was just explaining, VUCA is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? The world is also very, these days, very fast moving, very complex. What is acceptable today might not be accepted tomorrow, right? So our world is actually shifting a lot. The markets are volatile. Our clients' expectations are changing, and technology is also changing at a very, very rapid pace these days, right? So our clients, which is a good part, they see the value of IT. They also want to prioritize their legacy system modernization. They want to move towards the digital future. And nowadays, our clients also expect their IT to function seamlessly, to support their business. And the lines between the technology and business is also blurring these days. And as a result, we need to probably change the way we work. We need to adopt to the new ways of working. And we need to respond to that volatility, the VUCA world, right? So as fast as possible. And this kind of situation that we are in currently, right? It is also impacting the way the architects work. So let me talk about a little bit about agile architecture. The definition that you see on the PPT is from SAFe. But I would like to just take a step backward and discuss something about the traditional methodology. For example, waterfall model, right, which is actually a breakdown about project activities into sequential phases. For example, a requirement analysis phase, there is the design, construction, testing, deployment, and maintenance, right? So the deliverables from each of this phase is actually being passed over to the next phase. So when we are, for example, working on a construction phase, we are heavily dependent on the deliverables of the design, right? And when we talk about architecture related artifacts also, they're all developed in 2 or 3 months at one go. So this kind of, old style of working, waterfall model, this kind of developing architecture related artifacts within 2 to 3 months in one go, that kind of misconception is still there in the IT industry. So if we follow this way, right, the traditional methodology way, then, being agile and following the agile methodology in terms of architecture, it won't be compatible. So we will have to adapt to the pace at which the world is changing. So we will have to follow agile principles, agile architecture, where we can work as a team. We can follow a more agile architecture approach, where you can design a solution maybe in 1 or 2 days, right? But of course, the level of detail will not be as deep as the solution in the old format, right? The waterfall format. It was very deep. It was vast. But in the agile world, the solution that we build might not be so vast, but it will be sufficient to make any decisions to move forward. So working in an agile way, architects can drive the change. They can create business opportunities. They can shape and translate the IT, and they can, implement a more realizable and sustainable solutions for their clients. So agile architecture, all in all, is about, art of designing and delivering the right solution, which actually meets the client expectations, their requirements, the demands of the client, while being responsible, and responding to the change in a very uncertain environment. So when we talk about responding to the change, then we no longer have to create that big design upfront architecture. Instead, we can design architecture in a more agile fashion, in a more agile context. I hope I was clear on that. Let me move on to the concept of just enough architecture. So when we talk about just enough architecture, right, we have discussed a few challenges at the beginning of the session in the VUCA world. Because of that, architects also, we said that we have to adopt Agile. They have to positively embrace Agile. What is just enough architecture, right? It is about, providing the development teams, providing the Agile teams with just enough architecture so that they can implement the tasks that they have in hand. Right? It is about architects and development teams working together and implementing the client requirements. Okay. And when we talk about just enough architecture, it actually depends on a lot of concepts or aspects, right? For example, let me start with the manifesto of the Agile software development. It has 12 principles. So those 12 principles also can be applied to architects. We can also, as architects, follow the Agile approach to develop architecture. We can create content within architecture, and there is no one size fit all approach, right? When can we say that architecture is enough? It actually depends on several aspects. One is the objective of initiative. For example, if we are in the early stages of a program, the main objective is to support the decision-making process, where we can build a POC, we can build a prototype. During this kind of phases, the focus mainly lies on the visual aspects of the products, right? The features, rather than NFRs like scalability, security, and all that. These kind of NFRs will come into play in the later phase, maybe when we are moving towards a pilot or MVP, where we'll have to decide what fits into a larger landscape, right? And then we can keep increasing or enhancing it after the initial phase. Second one is the maturity of the target audience. For example, when we are at the team level, just enough architecture forms the blueprint of what needs to be done in the next sprint. In Agile, this blueprint should be able to provide as much as room possible for the design decisions to be made by the teams. We just have to make sure that the teams actually, follow the MVA, minimum viable architecture, and there are guardrails that are there so that the team is on track. Third is about amount of technical risk and uncertainty. If we have more risk in a particular engagement, then we'll have to work on more upfront design more research is also required. So in order to reduce that risk, architects should kind of create POCs or architectural spikes, right? So that they can validate the assumptions and they can also respond to the technological changes, or they can explore more technology choices. So there is this agile principle which says that when in doubt, code it out, right? So if we have any such uncertainty, if there is any risk, right? First, let's build a POC and then you can validate the assumptions. And when we talk about blueprint, it should actually contain all the fundamental decisions that are very, very important for your program. For example, what kind of technology you want to use, what kind of framework, what are the high-level architectural patterns that you want to follow, right? And another way of reducing technical risk is to use the reference architecture. For example, in oil and gas industry or a telecom industry, right, there are standard reference architectures that are available. We can reuse them so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to make those kind of architectural decisions when the problem is same across the industry, right? And the last one being the type of engagements. You all must have observed we are working on engagements which are of fixed price contracts, right? Where there is fixed scope, fixed delivery dates. So in this scenario, we might have to, build a significant amount of upfront architecture because we have to get that better view or better understanding on how much work is required. So for fixed price contracts, we'll have to kind of work on architecture upfront a lot, right? And apart from these above aspects that I just discussed, there are a couple of main principles of just enough architecture. For example, thinking big. As architects, our primary objective should be, building a high standard competitive solution, right? With a very clear and target architecture in mind. And regarding the team should be able to deliver a small operational pieces of software which actually demonstrate the value of the architecture enabler work. And when we talk about just enough architecture, right, architects should not work in silos, right? There is a misconception that architects, they're just sitting in some ivory tower. They are far away from the ground realities. They don't know what is happening with the teams, right? So as architects, we should not work in silos. We should be constantly interacting with the teams, with the development teams. We have to give them feedback. We have to take feedback from them. And we'll have to make sure that the design that we are providing to the teams are actually helpful to the team, and it is relevant, and it is also helping us to learn continuously. So, and one last point I wanted to share here is about the failure. So, in most of the programs that we work, right, there is some sort of, a small aspect of, failure that can occur, right? So, we'll have to be ready to do some kind of refactoring or rebuilding the architecture. So, one aspect of architecture is architecture documentation. So when we are creating architecture documentation, right? If I go back to a little bit about traditional waterfall model, we used to create pages and tons of documentation. But when we move towards agile architecture, we just need to make sure that we are not just documenting for the sake of documentation, right? We should not be documenting just to follow some kind of a process or a framework, right? When we do documentation, we have to keep the reader in mind. Who is going to read my architecture documentation? And we'll have to also make sure that even if the documentation is less, right, it is useful for the person who is reading it, rather than the old school waterfall model where we are building an extensive documentation, nobody's using it, right? And a few pointers I wanted to share about documentation, right? As architects, when we do architecture related documentation, we should have a very clear view about the target audience and what are their needs in terms of timing. Are they in an iteration? Are they in a program? What kind of sprint? 2 weeks, 4 week sprint? and what kind of content they are expecting that documentation, right? Are we going to explain any kind of technical challenges or guidelines, frameworks, standards, right? We have to make sure that we understand what the reader needs, what kind of space are they in executing the particular program, right? And one more thing that we'll have to make sure is avoid any kind of text only documents, right? As much as possible, use diagrams, because diagrams are a visual way of representing documentation, right? As they say, a picture is actually a worth 1,000 words, correct? We can use a lot of diagrams to explain the documentation, and we can also build those diagrams using tools like Archimate or a UML. There are a lot of tools that are available in the market. We can make use of them. And also avoid writing the document is if nobody is going to read it. Just for the sake of writing, please don't do it. It is not at all useful for anybody, and it is a waste of time for the architect. And if there is any publicly available information, right, if there are some kind of references that are available publicly, you can just put those references in the documentation, and we don't have to write the documentation again and again, right? And there is something called ADRs in Agile context. It is called architectural decision records, right? It is actually used as some kind of a documentation to capture any important architectural decisions that the architects take, right? What kind of context that decision was taking, what are its consequences and all that, right? And one last point that I want to emphasize with regards to architectural documentation is consider your documentation as code, right? So when we are doing coding, right, we use repositories. So these kind of repositories like GitHub and all that, they actually have a lot of features like branching, versioning, then text searching, a lot of good features, right? So we should also consider documentation as code, and we should also use this kind of approach so that all these kind of features are also available while we are doing the documentation. So what I mean to say is, when you're writing documentation, use these kind of tools that we use for coding also. For example, there is a doc tool chain, Arc42, ASCII doc, Plant UML. These kind of tools actually enable you to document similar to how we do coding. Okay? I'll move on to architecture governance, a very, very important aspect of architecture. When we talk about architectural governance within the Agile context, there are actually certain key elements that we'll have to keep in mind. Why are we doing architectural governance, right? What is the use of it, right? The use of doing an architectural governance is, we'll have to ensure that there is some kind of alignment between the emerging and the intentional architecture. We'll talk about it in the later slides. And we'll have to, help identify the enablers in the architectural journey. What kind of support is, needed to the development teams? What kind of decision making that we'll have to do? What kind of collaboration is required, right? So one of it is, faster architectural decision. So in the Agile architecture, slow decision making is always a challenge. That is the main challenge. And in order to accelerate the decision-making process, we will have to empower the right set of people at the right level, right? For example, there could be architects who are working in a single team, or there could be architects who are working across multiple teams. There could be architects who are at, working at the enterprise level. We'll have to make sure that there are right people identified who can make the decisions on behalf of the teams, and the decision making process is faster now, right? When we talk about decision making process, identifying the right people at the right level is one part of it. Second part is, we need to define a clear set of boundaries. right? The reason for that is not everybody or anybody in the project can make a decision, right? So there has to be clear boundaries on who can take those decisions. Along with that, we have to provide a clear set of examples of what architectural governance means. Meaning, what are the different decisions that the right people can take? For example, who can make the decision about changing cloud providers? Who can make the decision about adopting a new framework or a new technology or new programming language, right? So that kind of examples also, if we can give, that would be a very easier way for architects to manage the governance. Second thing is about architectural compliance. I'll give you an example for that. We all must have seen when we are executing our IT projects, right? There could be a deviation between the initially defined architecture and probably when we do an inception phase or solution discovery phase. What is the architecture that we have defined? But when we are going through the agile sprints, we might be seeing that there is a lot of deviation from this initially defined architecture, right? Sometimes architects might be aware of that deviation, sometimes they are not. There could be a very, very good reason on why the developers or the teams, agile teams, are deviating from, from the initially defined architecture. But we'll have to make sure as architects that we are aware if there is any deviation, what is the reason why they're deviating, and we'll have to make sure that when there is a deviation, it is done for the good reason, right? And the second thing is, as architects, we have to make sure that architectural compliance is adhered to. For example, if there is no good reason for deviation, we'll have to make sure that there is compliance. For that purpose, we can have a working reference architecture, for example, like a walking skeleton, as they call, right, in agile terminology, which is actually a template which has a full architectural principle, maybe a basic POC or an architectural spike or a prototype kind of thing. And this kind of reference architecture can be decided, between the development agile teams as well as the architects. And we can also integrate the architectural compliance check in the user stories also. For example, when a developer is working on a user story, right? So at the end of user story, they'll have to show the product owner about the definition of that. What are the number of steps that are, they have followed, so that they can say that the particular user story is complete, right? So architectural compliance check also can be integrated in the definition of done, so that if there is any deviation, it gets, it gets shown and the people will not be able to escape with that. And one other way of, automating this compliance check is including this in the CI/CD pipeline, right? So what happens is every time there is a build that is happening, right? Automatically, if there are any deviations to the architectural compliance, then immediately it gets highlighted. So that is how we'll be able to identify. Another aspect of governance is the collaboration between the architects and the development teams. So it is very, very important factor. Collaboration should be there between those two teams, because the success of any engagement depends on the collaboration. So when we talk about collaboration, as I was mentioning earlier, architects should not be sitting in some kind of ivory tower, and there have to be be closer to the ground realities. They have to collaborate with the agile teams. They have to make sure that whatever designs or whatever decisions that they have made are actually in sync with the requirement, and the development teams are aware of what they have to do, and they're valued and used by the teams too. So while doing all this, the architects also have to keep the bigger picture in mind. They'll have to kind of prioritize the architectural topics, identify if there are any enablers required, right? They'll have to take inputs and continuous feedback from the agile teams too. So as I was mentioning earlier, when I talk about collaboration and architects mingling with the agile teams, there should not be any kind of extra meetings. Meetings have to be in a very minimal number, and the collaboration between the teams have to be maximum. So instead of architects acting like a controlling authority, they can actually be part of the team. They can participate in all the agile ceremonies, for example, sprint planning sessions or a demo session, retro sessions, right? Instead of having a lot of teams to have those kind of discussions, architects can be part of those agile teams. They can participate in all those ceremonies, and they'll have to make sure that there is a good collaboration between the teams. And a few of the best practices in terms of governance I wanted to share. There is something called as architecture community of practice, right? So these kind of setting up of small communities where all architects can just join once or twice a week, or maybe a month or so, where they can discuss their common challenges. If there are any latest technologies, they can discuss. If there are any architectural decisions that need to be made, they can discuss all of that, right? And the second one is the Jamba Walks. Jamba Walks is actually an opportunity so that everybody in the team can just take a step back from their day-to-day work. They can interact with each other. They can see what kind of value that the team is creating. They can take the feedback. They can receive the feedback and see how team is working. Is everything going fine, right? So that kind of informal walking sessions, right, just on the floor of the workstation, that can be done. And there is something that SAFE also recommends, which is architect sync event, where the architects are actually aligned among themselves. They share the progress at the large solution level. And another example is technology radar. This is actually a visual management way of communicating between the architects. And this kind of technology radar is actually helping for alignment among the teams, about the details regarding any new techniques or any new platforms or languages or frameworks. And then there is ADR that I just discussed as part of architectural governance also, which is actually decision making documentation, where all the decisions regarding architecture are documented with the context and the consequence in mind. I'll move on to time management. Time management, very, very important aspect for everybody, not just architects. As discussed earlier, right, we were talking about the traditional model of big design upfront approach, where the architecture design has to be completed and perfected before the implementation starts. But when we talk about agile architecture, we have to transform ourselves from that approach. We have to be moving towards more just-in-time approach, right? Implementing the architecture or documenting the target architecture in a more iterative fashion, in a more bit by bit, step by step fashion. And if we have to do that, if architects have to deliver in an iterative way, then the key question that they need to understand is who needs what by when, right? I will give you some of the examples of that statement, who needs what by when. For example, if an architect is working on a prototype, then they don't need to kind of work on architecting the non-functional requirements. If if they're working on some kind of documentation, they need to know what is the information is each stakeholder need, at what point of time they need it. When it comes to governance, architects should be aware of what architectural decisions must be taken at what point of time, right? And for example, if we have a system architect who is working at a team level, then they'll have to focus on what agile teams need, right, in the current sprint or in the next sprint. So if an enterprise architect is working at the enterprise level, they need to understand what project management plans that the team is going to deliver within a certain timeline, for example, 6 months or 12 months, right? So from that perspective, they have to understand who needs what by when, and they need to derive what are the enabler epics that they need to be delivered, right? So this kind of understanding the architect should have. The next topic is about iteration in chunks. Agile, as you all know, it's all about iterations, right? So when agile architecture approach is being followed, then architecture will be delivered in more iterations, meaning there should be a certain scope of what an architect has to deliver. For example, what are the enabler topics that have to be delivered by the architects? So if they have to know that, they'll have to kind of participate in the PI planning meeting. They'll have to have a very clear understanding on what kind of preparations are required for the upcoming iteration or upcoming program, right? Once they get that clear understanding of what is the scope, then they need to understand, what kind of business functionality is there in the backlog, right? So based on that, they'll have to identify the enablers and they'll have to support that functionality. And these days, we also have seen that the product delivery cycles are very, very short, and deliverables by architects and the teams are also smaller, right? So, and one of the best practice I want to suggest here is, architects can take the role of technical product owner. You all must have heard about product owner in Agile, right? But architects can take a role of technical product owner, where they can be collaborating with the product owners and see what is the priority that they are trying to follow, what is the backlog that is there, and they can actually prioritize the architecture work by collaboratively working with the product owner. And whatever above that I was trying to explain is some of the important aspects in terms of agile architecture. I just wanted to share some of the ways of working in agile architecture. So these are all industry standard agile methodologies or frameworks. What are their suggestions when we have to follow agile architecture? Few things I just wanted to highlight here. One is emerging architecture and intentional architecture. I spoke about it at the earlier point of the session. I just wanted to explain what is that all about, right? So before explaining that, let's discuss about traditional architecture approach, where we have a very early architecture work, which is very, very extensive, right? So this is creating a huge amount of documentation. There is a lot of unvalidated decisions that we'll have to take, because at that point of time in the traditional approach, we might not have all the information which will help us to take those decisions, right? So as an alternative method, what we can do is we can split the architecture into intentional architecture and emergent architecture. What is intentional architecture? Intentional architecture is more of a top-down approach, where at the initial phases of the program, for example, solution definition phase or inception phase, architects can build a architecture where they highlight the architecture principles that have to be followed, what kind of strategies, what kind of initiatives that have to be followed, right? So this actually will guide and help the development teams, and they will give certain pointers on what kind of design, what kind of performance, what kind of usabilities, and some kind of guidance to the team in terms of design and implementation also will be provided. And emergent architecture is where the architecture emerges from the developers who are actually creating the system. So this is, more of a evolutionary and incremental approach. This will actually help the developers to, respond to the immediate needs of the clients, and they will, able to evolve the design based on the changes that the client has. And the second thing that I wanted to highlight is different roles the architect can perform. So according to SAFe, there are actually 3 roles. One is the system architect role, where the architect is actually interacting with the teams. They're part of the agile teams. There is solution architect, who is actually overseeing the solution, who is supporting the system architects. Then there is enterprise architect, who's actually working at the enterprise level, who are developing the architecture landscape. The second standard is having an architectural runway, right? So this is actually, it provides actually a technical foundation for smoother development, right? So we could be, maybe in an AMS project or a new implementation project or a greenfield, brownfield, wherever we are. If we have a very good architectural runway, then we will be able to smoothly develop any new features or any new capabilities. So what is architectural runway, right? It is not just some kind of a, a myth kind of a thing. It actually has existing code. If you are in an AMS kind of engagement, it has certain existing code that was there since the beginning of implementation. It could be enabler work. It could be some kind of a patch for in terms of product development. It could be technical infrastructure, and it could be anything that is actually helping us to implement the new features, new capabilities that we have as part of the program, right? And it will also help us avoid any kind of excessive redesign, excessive delays too. And the next one is minimum viable architecture. I spoke about it a little bit at the beginning of the session, it is actually derived from minimum viable product, MVP, right? And minimum viable architecture, MVA, is actually a set of architectural principles which actually support the MVP, right? So we could imagine MVA as some kind of a walking skeleton. It is actually a tiny implementation of the system that they want to build. It might perform a small end-to-end, function. And with each iteration in the program, more and more architecture can be added to this walking skeleton as a flesh, right? And just like MVP, MVA is also built on very incremental fashion, right? It is very, both MVP and MVA, they go in sync together. The last one is documentation as code. I spoke about it at length when we were discussing just enough documentation. With that, I would like to move to the characteristics that an architect has to possess in an agile world. Architects, we know, they're very, very, important people, and they're very, essential and key to any IT program, right? So they add a lot of value, they play a very key role, and they'll have to kind of, collaborate with the development delivery teams. And when we talk about architects, the very, very important characteristic, that they have to possess is they'll have to be agile themselves. They have to be flexible themselves. It's not like, okay, at the beginning of the project, I just designed some solution and I'm not going to change it, right? They have to be flexible. During the execution of the program, we might have seen there are tons of changes to the requirements. We see that every day. So architects have to be, flexible enough to make sure that as and when the user or the client changes the requirements, they have to be flexible enough to change the architecture too, right? They'll have to, navigate through that VUCA world. They'll have to navigate through the design, demands and advancements, right? That are in the market. Sometimes what happens is when we are implementing a project, a new version of the product that we are working on maybe can come up, right? We might have to talk to the product management team, probably get that patch or something like that and implement it in our application, right? And architects are actually value creators, right? They'll have to help the business so that they can envision their future. They can integrate the IT into the business, right? At the beginning of the project, session, I was talking about, how the lines between the business and IT is getting blurred, right? So architects are the key people who can make that. They are the people who can provide better value for money. So clients are actually spending a lot, millions of dollars, millions of, euros on our IT engagements, right? So what is the value that they are going to get out of it, right? So architects are actually people who can provide that. And they should also act as entrepreneurs, right? They'll have to have that instinct. They'll have to, strive to get a good customer satisfaction. They'll have to make sure that the engagement is actually being implemented with, reduced cost, right? So they have to have that instinct so that they'll be adding to the success of the project. And the last one that I wanted to highlight is if there is any new technology that is, coming up in the market, or any trend for that matter, right? I was, talking about it, technology changes, right? They're being just changed every 6 months or every 3 months also. There is something new that comes up, right? So they'll have to be aware of what is that new trend or technology that is there in the market, released in the market, and they'll have to have that kind of analytical skills where they can analyze that new product or new technology or new trend. Is it beneficial for our client? Is it useful for our client? What if we use that in our program, right? So that kind of analytical mindset they should have, so that they can adopt that new change, and they could help the clients accelerate their digital mission or aim. So all in all, I just wanted to highlight that architects are very, very important while executing the IT projects in the agile world. And with that, I would like to conclude today's session, and I hope it was beneficial for all of you. And if you have any questions, we can have a good discussion. You can unmute yourself, and probably if you want to share something also, please go ahead and do. Or if you have any questions, we can discuss. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Kirti. So seriously, it's a nice impact on everyone, and we literally love these brief explanations where you gave on the documentation and the governance compliance, and also exactly on the time management as well. Yeah, and there was a seriously great and brief explanation on the architecture on the agile world. Thanks a lot. Yeah. So before going to a Q&A session, I would like to share, a small assessment, a mini assessment kind of these, entire discussions where the candidates can also know how the meeting went on. Yeah, just now I've shared the link on the chat box. So please, everyone, you can directly click on the link. This link will be staying active from 3:50 to 4:30. You can join it at, you can just click it at any time, and you can log in at any time. You can use the access code where we have mentioned below, and you can start the assessment accordingly.
Yeah, so and for all the candidates who have submitted the assessment, we'll be providing a participation certificate from the Computer Society of India Hyderabad chapter, and that will be emailed to you shortly.
Yeah, thank you, Sunil. Yeah, so my dear fellow mates, so we can go with Q&A session. So anyone have any doubts regarding these topics? Please go ahead.
Let me put the icebreaker question to Kirti Bala here. So I wanted your view how this new adaptive architectures to address the VUCA world. You see, is there any kind of a significant difference when you are trying to use this concept with respect to the sustainable problems which you are trying to solve? Because today we see that many enterprises are going through the needs where they need to address the sustainability issues. And secondly, wanted to understand how this would be different for the different industry segments. They all see together in a similar way, or the approaches change? And for the retail, for banking and financial, for pharma and healthcare, how this will be different, because the volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity changes from industry to industry segments. So wanted to draw your perspective on that.
Sure, Pal. I think it was an excellent question that we all have to think about. One is the sustainability aspect. As you just mentioned, right? I think these days every organization is insisting on sustainability, right? So when we are building the architecture, we have to keep those aspects in mind. For example, if there is, we are working on a data project, correct? So how much amount of data is really required to be stored in your database? Is it, tons of data? Is it really required? Are we using it for some purpose? Is it used for some kind of analytics? So based on that, we can probably identify different ways where we can reduce that amount of data that we are trying to store in our databases, wherein it is going to impact the environment too. Second example could be, maybe moving towards a more cloud approach, right? Instead of having that big bang servers in on-premise, probably we can move towards cloud, which is more a sustainable option, right? So when we are designing our architecture, we'll have to kind of explore all the sustainable solutions that are available to us, right? So that part is actually common across different different practices or different industries. I come from insurance industry, and we just make sure that okay, can I use some kind of cloud feature? Can I use some kind of product that is already available in the market, so that I don't have to build everything from the scratch, right? Something which can sometimes impact the nature, something that is more sustainable, something that is more valuable to the client too, right? So that kind of different pointers is something that we'll have to think about, and it is an ongoing thing till the end of the program too. So, and even if the program is complete, probably we can identify few ways where we can probably implement a more sustainable solution. The second one was the VUCA world, right? So as you mentioned, VUCA world, maybe if you talk about insurance and banking is more, there is more volatility, there is more uncertainty. But when you talk about insurance, it is not so much. They are still in their own, bubble. Uh, Things don't change that fast. But when we talk about industry, when we compare industry to industry, right, definitely the challenges are different, and we'll have to kind of adapt to that, and the way we handle could be same, right? When we talk about agile architecture, when we talk about VUCA world, how do we navigate, right? So the way we can navigate could be same. The techniques that I just discussed, the best practices that we can follow could be same, but as you said, the level of complexity can be different between the different things. That's what I wanted to share. Maybe if you have some thoughts, I think we can hear too.
No, I agree that the complexities would be different in the different industry segments, but as an architect, one need to take a conscious view how new technologies need to be embraced when you're trying to redefine your architectures. Say, for an instance, uh, if you're building any kind of a solutions in architecture for the retail world, I'm of an opinion that you need to be leveraging many of the smart sensor technologies and IoT based technologies as part of your architecting when you're trying to architect your solutions, because that will allow you to be more agile and make your solutions to be more configurable to react to the new changes, because adaptive architectures need to uh, go with a framework called sense, adapt, act and response, what we call SAR framework, sense, act and respond. So any architecture which has the capability to sense the change, ability to analyze and act and respond to the change will be more adaptive in nature and drive that particular change to the great deal. So that is one dimensional way of thinking. But significantly, when you're trying to speak, the intent of this uh, entire architectural thinking process is to bring that configurability, flexibility, adaptability in your solution designs. Earlier, it used to be monolith, but now people are trying to bring in the microservices pattern, containerized solutions. All these concepts are getting evolved to make the architecture to be more flexible and adaptable. So keep the business problems into the center of the solution, center of the problem, center of the context, so that you will be able to look at the different elements which will able to provide that capability to address these VUCA related problems.
True, Bala. I think you shared some of the important aspects that we have to keep in mind. Thank you.
So still anyone has any other questions? Okay. So it has been such an honor to be a part of this glorious webinar. So on behalf of the entire organization and the fellow mates, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Kirti, for taking your valuable time on this webinar to make us appreciate and very successful. And thank you, Kirti. Thanks for joining in this wonderful webinar and making it success. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Harsha. I think I would like to thank CSI Hyderabad and Chandra Garu and Sunil for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much. And I hope in future we could collaborate more and, we can, work on more wonderful topics, right? Thank you so much.
Kirti, Chandra here.
Hello, Chandra.
Hello. Kirti, that's very informative talk. Thank you very much. Yes,
Thank you,
as you said, we look forward to collaborate and, work on more programs. Okay. Thank you, Bala. You have begun the program. This is the first webinar in this new year 2023. And we will have, many more to follow. And thank you, Harsha, for anchoring the whole program. Thanks, Sunil.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.